Oh, welcome to Desperate Living Music, and welcome to Desperate Living Music, as this is, for all intents and purposes, the first video on this channel. I know there's one already on here. That was a kind of carryover from the previous Desperate Living channel, the previous experiment that we did with Desperate Living Music. But here is the start, and how to get started. What do we do first? It's hard to say, you know, there's so much to look at. Do I just cover new releases? Do I cover old releases? Do I indulgently feed you through chunks of my record collection? Well, yeah, the latter is probably what's going to mainly happen, but, you know, I'll certainly be covering new stuff, be covering bands. So what should we look at first? I've got lots of records to choose from, be it vinyl, CD, even, God help us, cassettes. So, where to start? Well, luckily I picked something up quite recently that's kind of given me a theme to begin with. And that record is Blondie, live 1977, at the Old Waldorf, San Francisco, September the 21st. Taken from a classic radio broadcast, and if you're not getting the clue right now, let's just say that this is a record of indeterminate origin, or as we more generally call them, a bootleg. I was amazed to discover that bootlegs was something that still existed, and still existed on vinyl. I was a big fan of the bootleg album back in the day, which is where the rest of the records that I'll be showing you in a few moments entered my life, one way or another. But let's have a quick look at this one first. This is, as it said on the sleeve, a radio recording, and you notice it's got the little sticker here. Kind of, if you glance at it, it looks a little bit like a Record Store Day label. I'm sure that's just coincidental. But anyway, yeah, it's a really nice piece of work on kind of a red marble vinyl, and I'm amazed to discover that not only are these albums still out there, still being produced, but that they're incredibly easy to get hold of. I think that perhaps stuff like this is on the Second Records label, number 157 of 250, I think. Is that a 5? Hard to say. And not for sale in North America, sorry American viewers. This might be what we call grey market rather than out and out bootleg. It's possible that records like this are being effectively licensed from the radio stations that originally broadcast them. It's possible, but it feels unlikely, particularly as this album has been available many times under many different titles, the same recording. Now, as a recording goes, it's great. It's, you know, it's an off-air radio recording. Really good. If there's any kind of complaint about the quality, it's simply that maybe the vocals are too upfront. They're kind of too far up in the mix a little bit, but not to a terrible degree. Great quality vinyl, great transfer, really good performance. You know, it's got that fantastic combination of raw chaos and great tunes. Obviously, this is early Blondie stuff. This is pre-Blondie having hit records. I mean, it's got I'm always touched by your presence, dear, on here, but that's the only one of these that was really what you would call a hit. Blondie, when they were still at their weird, semi-experimental, oddball, retro rock and roll sound from the first couple of albums. But the point of this is that there's a lot of these albums, it seems, out there, not just by Blondie, by many artists, some of whom are, I guess, obvious choices in the sense that they were big in the bootleg scene to begin with. So obviously lots of Led Zeppelin stuff out there, lots of Pink Floyd, bands of that era. Fewer bands of more recent times, it has to be said. When I was younger and I first started picking up bootlegs, I was vaguely aware that if you went to the right shops you would find bootleg albums, but I never did go to the right shops. For me, bootlegs were always the kind of thing that you would pick up at record fairs and collector events like that, where they would cost a pretty penny. At the time that an average LP would be about £5 in the UK, a bootleg could put you back 10, 15, 20 even, particularly if it was a double album. And obviously they were for the connoisseurs. It's why I've always argued that bootlegs do no harm to the artist. It doesn't take any money away from them because nobody is buying a bootleg instead of buying a legit release. Nobody's going to splash out 20 quid on an LP when they could buy what is often a much more professionally recorded album for a quarter of that price. So who was buying bootlegs? Obviously fans, people who couldn't get enough of a particular artist, for the most part. Me, I was kind of obsessed with the idea of bootlegs as a whole, but I had a limited budget as both a teenage schoolboy and then somebody who left school and avoided getting a job for as long as entirely possible. So I never had a big disposable income by the time I actually did reach the point of having a regular wage. Then CDs had kind of taken over from vinyl anyway, and while bootlegs were still available on CD, they just weren't as appealing, has to be said. They weren't something that I felt like I wanted to pay bigger money for. I was quite happy to pick up bootlegs on tape. Most of the bootleg stuff I had was on tape. Some of it was only ever released on tape. Some of it was recordings of vinyl bootlegs. But obviously tapes were a great deal cheaper, and you could trade tapes. You could trade tapes with fellow collectors and so build up a fairly large collection of recordings that weren't necessarily the best. You have to remember that certainly if you were trading tapes, every copy you got had been recorded off another tape by and large, and then maybe you'd record that for somebody else off another tape. So, you might end up with stuff that was 3, 4, 5 generations down. Still listenable, but not what you would call pristine. You certainly wouldn't want to give that tape to anybody to press up into a proper record. Some of these are things that I bought because I was very enthusiastic for the band. Some are things that I would find in second-hand record shops quite cheap, and if I found a bootleg in a second-hand record shop, I was buying it regardless of who the artist was. Let's have a quick look at what I have here. Let's kick off with Made of Iron Maiden, which is an interesting release. This claims to be a Czechoslovakian release, may well be. Doesn't actually have a label name as such. Claims to be licensed by All Day Music. I'm not sure who they license it from. It's just a standard black vinyl album. So what we have on here is a mixed bag of material. The A-side features the Bruce Dickinson demo recordings that he did when effectively auditioning for the band. Was he auditioning for the band, or were they just, making sure that it would all work out between them? So anyway, it contains 4 tracks: Twilight Zone, Child Killers, and I Remember Tomorrow, as well as a couple of novelty numbers. Who knows where these emerged from? There's Xmas Wishes, so possibly some kind of fan club thing, I don't know, and a kind of drunken, not at all respectful version of Stairway to Heaven. Led Zeppelin fans should cover their ears, they'll be most upset. The B-side, and it is side A and side B, not side 1 and side 2 on this particular album, is half a dozen tracks from a 1981 performance in Holland, with Paul Di'Anno still on vocals at that point. Can't quite remember how I came across this. I think I found it at a record fair, and it was pretty cheap, I think. Whenever I was picking this stuff up, when you had a choice between your bootleg album that would cost 8 quid and your bootleg album that cost 15 quid, the 8 quid one was often far more attractive when you didn't have a lot of money to spend. I think this was definitely a cheaper recording at that point. This emerged, I guess, probably about 1982, I think. Certainly I think it was after the release of Number of the Beast. Sound quality it's okay. I should say that a lot of these albums, this included, or certainly the Dickinson demos, will be available online if you're interested in hearing records without actually wanting to shell out for the vinyl. Lots of this stuff is on YouTube if you take a look. Not an exceptional record, but if you're a fan of Iron Maiden, then I suppose it's got some kind of historical value to it. An album that I picked up in my local second-hand record shop is the Rolling Stones European Tour 1970, complete on one disc, on the Trademark of Quality label. As you can see, it's a particularly minimalist cover, completely blank back. And there is a note in here of what the track listing is: Jumpin' Jack Flash, Roll Over Beethoven, Sympathy for the Devil, Let It Rock, Little Queenie, Brown Sugar, Midnight Rambler, Live With Me, Stray Cat Blues, Love in Vain, Dead Flowers. I have a feeling that they're not actually all on this particular version. I know that there's a double album version of this. The actual track listing up here online, and the track listing basically is the same but in a different order, so I don't know what's correct, what isn't. Bootlegs existed in many versions, and actually being able to work out if they're all identical is hard to tell. For instance, this particular edition is on blue vinyl, which is a version that according to Discogs doesn't exist. There are lots of coloured vinyl versions of the album listed there, but not blue. And of course the problem with bootlegs is that they're not actually owned by anybody. It's not like a label like Trademark of Quality can turn around and sue somebody for putting out a copy of their album, which I think probably happened a lot. This feels like it's a legit TMOQ release, but it might not be. As far as the recording goes, it's pretty solid. Yeah, so it's a mono recording because obviously tape recorders of the age were mostly mono, particularly the kind that you could smuggle into a gig. But it's a good mono recording of the performance. It's got that mix of rawness that you would never get on an official live album. Solid performances, not perfect by any means. You know, if you compare this to official Stones live albums, I think it's preferable, and you know that's often the case with a lot of this stuff, which is again why bootlegs were popular, because they felt more genuine, they felt more authentic. No overdubs, no remixing, no blending of two different versions of the song and a crowd reaction from another show. What you see is what you get. If it says it's that particular gig, well, actually, let's back that up a bit. If it says it's that particular gig, that might not be completely true, but you do know that the recording that you're listening to is raw, live, untouched. Here's another curious one that I think I picked up quite cheaply. For some reason, £10 seems to leap out at a price for me, but you know, I might be wrong. Anyway, U2 live from the Lipton Village. I know, U2, but you know, they were at this point, 1985, I believe this was. Yeah, made 1985 certainly. Then, you know, U2 were still a kind of cool, vaguely indie band. So again, it's a fairly straightforward looking release. Labels that don't actually say who the artist is. That was quite often the case, because the less you told pressing plants, then the fewer questions they would find themselves obliged to ask. This is on the Spitting at Journalists label. Back in 1985, a U2 bootleg was probably quite interesting in that most of the stuff you saw at that point was old stuff. It was stuff from the 1970s, maybe the beginning of the 80s. It was all the classic rock bands, as we would now call them. U2 were still hot, young chaps at this point. Again, it's a good quality recording, if memory serves. I haven't listened to this in many years, but as far as I recall, it was a fine quality recording. Clearly, you know, these days you listen to U2, you just think of Bono all the time, and it's kind of an off-putting experience, isn't it? But this was a good album. Another curio that I picked up in a second-hand shop was Marillion Live, selling fish by the pound. This may be the first Marillion bootleg album. I don't know how many there actually were, but again, they were like the hot new band of the time. I was, and still am, a big fan of prog rock, and so I was certainly happy to obtain this for a bargain price. As you can see, white labelled, It's not a great album, to be honest, even if you are a Marillion fan, and I know that they're the kind of band that you either love or hate. I can feel my wife's skin crawling in the other room by osmosis, knowing that this is in the house. But yeah, it's an interesting sleeve that really hammers home the connection between Marillion, their music, and Genesis. So constant references to Genesis scattered across this album. So what's interesting about this is that it features a live recording of the band's epic track Grendel, which, as I recall, they didn't play on their 1983 UK tour. I did see them, and I do recall them making a very big point about the fact that it wasn't being played on that tour. So maybe I guess maybe they played it on one gig, who can say, or maybe this again isn't quite accurate in its description of where the stuff came from. Grendel is, close your ears if you're a Marillion fan, but I do think that Grendel is a fucking awful track, and quite understood why they would put it to bed very quickly. It's the kind of thing that was given a hangover from them trying to be like a 70s prog band, trying to do their own version of Supper's Ready or something, but it's not great, doesn't hang together. It's interesting, they tucked it away on the B-side of the 12-inch of their first single. This is on Dr. Diaper Records, another reference of course to Genesis. Lots of imagery on here from The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, as well as Nursery Crime. Promises Volume 2, I don't know if that was ever released or not, I never paid any attention. This wasn't a great record, it's not a good performance, and it's a curious selection of tracks. I mean, Script for Justice to Garden Party, 3 Boats Down from the Candide, Chelsea Monday, He Knows You Know, and the aforementioned Grendel. Maybe not the best stuff. I'd maybe listen to this once, twice, and then put it aside. So the bulk of my bootleg collecting was of Pink Floyd albums of various kinds, and I'll show you these in chronological order, not in release order. So we'll start off with the Great Lost Pink Floyd album, which is, it's not a live album, it's a collection of what were then, at the time, unavailable tracks. So alternate takes, demo versions, things like that. It's an interesting mix, an incredibly flimsy sleeve, but a colour sleeve when colour sleeves were rare. As you can see with a lot of these things, that they've kind of come unglued. I should probably get them fixed. It's quite easy to do. The album itself is on blue vinyl. Pretty basic labelling. Sound quality is a bit of a mix on this. They're probably squeezing a little bit too much on, or it's just not particularly great pressing. But it does claim tracks are substantially longer than on any other inferior collector's edition, so you know, it's like our bootleg is better than other people's bootlegs, and it was good to have access to these tracks, but this isn't one that I've played a great deal. The cheapest bootleg I ever bought outside of second-hand shops was Beyond the Stars, which for some reason, this 1972 recording of Dark Side of the Moon was always incredibly cheap, like £5, so essentially the same price as a regular record. No idea why. You know, I'm not sure that they really priced these things according to the quality of the pressing or the music or the recording. As you can see, basic black vinyl again, and there's not much else I can really say about this. It's a 1972 performance of Dark Side of the Moon from like a year before the album came out. Interesting bit of generic sci-fi on the cover. I mean, blank back. It's not an album that looks like it's particularly luxurious pressing, and the sound is okay. This feels like it probably is a bootleg of a bootleg. It's maybe a pressing of somebody else's recording of that show. If you're a bootleg connoisseur, if you're a Pink Floyd obsessive, you'll probably know more about it than I do. But it was always fascinating that it was always cheap, and not from guys who sold other things cheaply. Much better is Pigs, Wishes and Moons on Moonchild Records. And this is from 1975. Says here, recorded live on stage at the Boston Garden, June 18th, 1975, which may or may not be true. But basically it contains raving and drooling, You Gotta Be Crazy, which of course later became Sheep and Dogs, Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Have a Cigar, and Dark Side of the Moon. It's a curious mix because the tracks don't end at the end of side 1 or side 2. It's a double album. Tracks will fade out and then carry on the next side, which is a bit inconvenient, but it's a great recording. Really good, really solid. You'll notice that, according to the label, it's on Good Times Records, and it's called Back in '69. As you can probably imagine, when I bought this and got it home, because you couldn't really inspect it, I was a bit unnerved to think that I'd been sold a duck, that in fact whatever was in the sleeve here wasn't from 1975 at all. However, playing it, yeah, it is from 75. Interestingly, it's got sleeve notes on the back here. That's an article about Pink Floyd in the Syd Barrett era, which of course has nothing whatsoever to do with this. As you'll see, a bit beaten up now. It's been taped together. These are not records that were necessarily produced to a high standard. You know, and most bootleggers were into the music. They were heavily into music, don't get me wrong. You know, they weren't just doing this for the money, but at the same time they didn't have the kind of luxuries that regular record labels have. Moonchild Records was exclusively distributed by a shop in Barcelona. I've got their address on. Italy and Spain and a couple of other countries in the 1970s. This was into the 1980s. This, I believe, was a 1980 release. It had kind of lax copyright laws, which allowed bootleggers to flourish there, not just in terms of being able to get stuff pressed and produced, but distributed as well. Now, around the same time that I was picking up the Pink Floyd albums, I also picked up a couple of Roger Waters albums. This is from the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking tours. This is from Stockholm, 1984. Thanks for the Ride, another double album with interesting labels, taken from artwork on the original tour program, as is most of the sleeve, with the exception of this front cover image. Don't quite know where that came from. So this, I recall, was a pretty solid recording featuring both halves of the set that Waters was performing in 1984, which is essentially lots of Pink Floyd tracks in the first half of the show, and then the whole of the Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking and the second half of the show. I did see those shows, and they were, gotta say, spectacular. The Pros and Cons of Hitchhiking, I'm not sure. I haven't listened to it in many years, so I can't really say how well it stands up. I think without the visuals of the show, the live recording of this particular album is just not quite there. The other Waters album was just called Roger, and you can see the track listing on the back. And as you'll note, well, two things to note on this really is that it's a different track listing than the 1984 performance. This is from 1985, I believe. The tracks chosen for this release are all Pink Floyd tracks. There's none of the solo album tracks on here. This, I recall, had good sound quality. So when you think of bootlegs, generally you're thinking of single band recordings, perhaps a live recording or unreleased tracks, that sort of thing. The kind of thing that I've just been looking at now. But there are a lot of other albums out there that are kind of more semi-legit or not legit. It's very hard to say. Depends how you want to look at them. If you look at Discogs, where bootlegs, of course, are not allowed to be sold on their marketplace, some of these albums will be available, most of them won't be. There are huge amounts of records that are compilations of old releases inspired by things like nuggets, that have gathered together a bunch of old records long since sunk into obscurity and treat them as effectively public domain. I'm talking about stuff like, you know, the Garage Punk Unknown collections, for instance. I mean, these are pretty basic handcrafted albums with fantastic stuff on them. Every track on these things, well, not every track, but, you know, pretty much all the tracks on here are glorious. You know, Florian Mundy and his Mondos doing Mondo, Druids, Jelly Belly, Morgans and the Derringers doing Werewolf. Werewolf's hilarious, Mike Evans, gruesome. All these albums are essential because where else were you going to get this kind of stuff? Obviously there were plenty of compilations coming out, so there's a bit of repetition that you might get spread around these records. Once again, as soon as somebody put one of these out on a compilation, there was nothing to stop somebody else buying that album and then lifting the track and putting it on their own compilation. Trans World Punk Rave Up, which consists of European bands from the 60s. Definitely hugely interesting because, of course, these are incredibly obscure bands. We have the likes of The Phrase, Tony Jackson, David John and the Mood from the UK, Phantom Brothers from Germany, T-Boons from Sweden. All fantastic stuff. And 1964 to 1968, lots of it recorded really crudely, put out on tiny labels or independently released, sunk into obscurity, of course, and God bless the people who were putting these things out. Back in the day, and the day would be, I guess, mid to late 80s into the beginning of the 1990s, you would get these, or I would get them certainly, and I think other people who were getting them primarily from places in Camden. Record shops in Camden had a big supply of these. I think obviously some of them were run by the people putting them out. My particular favourite of this time was Wavy Gravy, which you definitely can't get on Discogs. Fantastic cover, even more fantastic back cover, and this is an album where every track is a killer. So much good stuff on here. You know, the Shandel's Go Go Gorilla, Porter Wagner's Rubber Room, Wendell Austin's incredible LSD. There's some novelty tunes on here, but all fantastic, trashy, gimmicky, grindy numbers. I'm not showing you the actual vinyl for these because, you know, they're all just basic black vinyl recordings, but everything about this record is brilliant, and what it doesn't tell you on here is that each track is interspersed with radio spots for horror and exploitation movies. What's on here is like Humanoids from the Deep, Vampire Hookers, is it Vampire Playgirls, Vault of Horror, Chain Gang Women, Hallucination Generation. Those are the ones that I can recall off the top of my head. And on a similar bent, I Was a Teenage Caveman, which is full of tracks from 1966. Great cover art with all the pop culture references, including other albums, paperbacks, Naked Women, Tiki, and Monster of Piedras Blancas, I believe, on the back. So this sort of thing is still going on to a certain degree, maybe not with the world of 1960s garage punk, but there are interesting and definitely not legally produced compilations. Here's a particularly good one, Respect, on the Grande Bouche disc label. This is a collection of foreign language cover versions. So, for instance, you have a couple of classics on here. Cindy and Bert's Du Hond von Baskerville, which you may well be familiar with. It's a kind of completely rewritten version of Black Sabbath's Paranoid. Die Crazy Girls doing Leader of the Pack. Lots of other good stuff as well. Some foreign language recordings by the original artists. So you've got the Supremes singing in German. Stuff from Sylvie Vartan. All rather excellent. I have to say that the record itself has maybe a bit too much squeezed onto it. It's got a fairly cheap feel to it. Black vinyl, you can kind of see, I don't know how well the light is catching this, but you can see how many tracks are crammed in, which has, if memory serves, made it a bit prone to crackling and jumping. But all the tracks are fantastic, and of course, once again, you can probably kit all these online these days. It's nice to have them all in one place. And finally, similar kind of thing, is Na 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 Batman. So this is on the 1966 Records label. This is lots of cover versions, mainly from, again, 60s garage bands from around the world, all doing their own covers of the Batman themes, some of which are better than others, but there's stuff here from Link Ray, for instance, The Avengers, Nashville 5. You might think that an entire album of, how many is there, 16 versions of the Batman theme might get a bit boring, but believe me, you can play this and it's infinitely varied selection of interpretations. As you can see, this one's double wrapped up for reasons. Now this comes with a nice little fold out poster that has information about the bands and is on red marbled vinyl. Red marbled vinyl seems to be like a kind of go-to. I'm not complaining. I do like a coloured vinyl, which you will find out in a future video just how much. I'll certainly be doing coverage of what we used to call gimmick records. I'm not sure that coloured vinyl really qualifies as a gimmick record anymore, does it? I mean, it's so standard. So that's a look at some of the bootlegs that I've got. As I say, I was never a huge collector. I didn't have the money, and I just didn't have the inclination to maybe specialise in one or two or whatever bands. You know, I just wanted to pick up whatever looked interesting and was affordable. It was kind of an opportunist collection more than anything. I was probably far more specific on certain acts when it came down to things like cassettes, because of course they were much cheaper and much more available, as I discussed earlier. I'm still always on the lookout for bootlegs. Not really going to pay huge amounts of money for them. I don't think that's something that I'm particularly interested in doing. It's not like I have an overwhelming desire to own endless amounts of legally produced records, but at the same time, whenever I see them, if they're reasonably priced, if they look interesting, then I'm certainly going to be picking them up. And the discovery that I made that these things are still out there, perhaps more available than ever, and perhaps better quality than ever, is an interesting one. But of course, if you've got a large collection of bootlegs that you want to get rid of for pennies, then feel free to offer them to me. I can save them for posterity and add them to the Desperate Living archives, where they will be treasured and, of course, shared with the world online. Anyway, let me know what your favourite bootlegs are, or perhaps the ones that you thought were a complete waste of money, badly recorded, badly packaged, overpriced. Fascinated to hear your stories. If you enjoy this kind of rambling nonsense, I'll be making an effort to do quite a bit more of it, so feel free to hit that subscribe button. If you've enjoyed this video for whatever godforsaken reason, then you can hit the like button. It all helps build the channel and encourage me to do more of the same. I'll be back in a few days with a look at some more record, newish releases this time. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Happy trails.